everybody, this is Ed, otherwise known as Call Me Mr. Broadstreet. Welcome back to my latest review. First, I'm going to apologize for uploading this a little bit late, but a few things got in the way of me uploading it as of Friday this week. So I wanted to let people know that I'm reviewing the Hulu documentary McCartney 321. This was released back on Friday, July 16th. So I just wanted to give my review, my impressions of the documentary. I did take some notes upon my second viewing of the documentary. So there will be spoilers ahead. I just want to let folks know. And before I get into the review, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody for subscribing. I really appreciate it. And also, if you could just hit that bell, please give a thumbs up and subscribe. I really appreciate it. I just appreciate everybody listening to me sort of go on and ramble on about the solo Beatles. So the first thing you will have noticed before we get into the review is that, of course, I have my new decoration up. Not that I don't appreciate Elvis Costello, I certainly do, but I figured this would be a nice little addition to all my future videos. What this is a magazine advert that was framed I got off of eBay for Give My Regards to Broadstreet the album. So it's just kind of a nice little piece to add to my visuals, as it were, from here on out. So without further ado, let me just start by saying the non-spoiler review of the documentary is that I think this is a very nicely done documentary. Even for a hardcore fan such as myself, there's still a few little tidbits that you pick up and you learn throughout the documentary. Now, it does focus very heavily on the Beatles years. There's only a couple of little Wings and Paul's solo songs that really get mentioned during the documentary. Each episode, there's 6 episodes. Each episode is half an hour long. I easily think they could have done an hour for each episode and really gone further into Paul's solo career. I'll kind of save that for later. But again, just the final warning is that there are spoilers ahead, so if you haven't watched the documentary or you don't want to hear a lot about the documentary, I would advise you to at least pause this video, go watch the documentary, and then come back if you want. Other than that, let's just go ahead and get right into the documentary itself. I've got some notes here, so if you'll bear with me, I'm just going to look down at some of the notes I'm writing. I took a lot of notes upon the second viewing. So, here we go. We get the first episode of the documentary. Paul kind of describes with Rick Rubin. Now, Rick Rubin is the interviewer throughout the documentary. As a side note, Rick Rubin has done a lot of production. He's been an album producer for many years. He's done work with quite a few various acts. The 3 I can think of off the top of my head: work with the Beastie Boys, work with Neil Diamond, and work with, of course, Johnny Cash on quite a few of his later albums. Kind of a very stripped down approach is where his production style is, or tends to be. So I think he was a good choice to interview Paul. It's kind of one musician, as it were, talking to another. So episode 1, Paul and Rick are talking. It's also filmed in black and white, so the documentary itself is black and white. Any sort of pictures that you see, I was going to say videos, but any sort of pictures that you see before 1970 that are of the Beatles are colorized. So they colorized a lot of old photos, which was actually kind of a nice touch, I thought. So Paul is talking about playing standards with his dad as a kid. He kind of goes into that. Again, nice early colorized photos, as I mentioned just a moment ago. There's a funny little moment where I'm thinking of John for some reason. Paul mentions that he and John, as teenagers, when they would kind of get into arguments as they were riding across from each other, Paul would say, well, John wore glasses, so I'd call John, hey, Four Eyes, and John would retort back to Paul, well, okay, Pigeon Chest. I thought that was just a nice little touch that hadn't really heard before. The next part in episode 1, they kind of go into Michelle, the song, a little bit. What happened was Michelle was released in 1965 off of Rubber Soul, but it had been composed a while before, so in the early days, Paul would kind of do this little bit, this little guitar bit. John had art parties that he would invite Paul and George to, probably in the late 50s or very early 60s before Ringo joined the band. So Paul thought, hey, I could strike up a conversation with somebody and play that little guitar French bit, to impress somebody. So that's kind of the origin of that. They do go into a little bit of the Sgt. Pepper title song, and with a little help from my friends. Rick Rubin mentions the Laurel Canyon that Sgt. Pepper was playing throughout Laurel Canyon during that weekend. I'll kind of pause here and just say that the documentary does jump around the timeline, so it's not very much a strict chronological documentary. You don't go from 1963, 64, 65, and so on in a strictly chronological order. And I think that works for the documentary, being able to kind of jump around the timeline a little bit. So my notes will reflect that. Will just sort of reflect what I saw in the series. He does go into a story of meeting George. They were hitchhiking as kids. Paul would always have sort of a little cooking stove, as it were, that he and George would share some food on when they were dropped off from one destination to another, when they were probably like 14 or 15. Paul does mention one of the first songs he wrote, Thinking of Linking, which it is mentioned in the Beatles anthology as well, from 1995, which, funny enough, that song, there was a jam session on the bonus disc of the 2003 DVD release for the Beatles anthology, where it's Paul, George, and Ringo jamming at George's Friar Park estate back in 1994. So that's also very nice. I'll go into that further in a later review when I do review that set. There's a breakdown of While My Guitar Gently Weeps. Pardon me for that. It's a great breakdown of both bass and guitar, kind of going back and forth. And this is the real strength of a lot of the songs. They do kind of break down some of the elements of the songs. So even if you've heard the stories before, even if you've heard the songs before, it's just a lot of fun to kind of hear some of the isolated elements. And you're hearing Paul's commentary on some of the tracks, which is very, very nice. Episode 2, we go into, Paul kind of mentions a story how he couldn't read music. I'm a little skeptical of that myself. I mean, maybe he can't formally read music, but he'd have to know where the musical scales are from A to G or F. Not a musician, so please don't be too harsh on me in the comments. He also does some jamming at the piano, which is nice between songs. So him and Rick are kind of talking one-on-one at the piano, going from the piano back to the recording console. And one note about the recording console, now this seemed to be filmed near Paul's own studio out in the English countryside. They took the master tapes from Abbey Road and run it through this 8-track recorder. So that's how they're isolating all the elements. Now, supposedly these tapes had never been taken out of Abbey Road before, so they're going off the original master tapes. I'm sure quite a lot was involved in that. There's also just a little bit of the Let It Be film that's kind of shown throughout some of the documentary. Some very nice footage. Hopefully we're going to get that with the upcoming release of Peter Jackson's Let It Be. That cut, which will be amazing to see. Also in this Hulu documentary, again, they do a breakdown of Eleanor Rigby, which is very nice in episode 2. There's kind of a cool story on the mixing console about pop versus classical. Classical would have a higher setting at the end of the console, and then pop would have kind of a lower setting. The Beatles would kind of joke with the producers, well, why does classical get like this setting and pop get this setting? Thinking that the classical was getting the better higher end setting, but the engineers just explained that it was more just the settings, what was needed for the music. I'm sure nowadays it's very much you could just put anything through a console, through a modern console with however many tracks there are out there. Probably too many to count at this point. Another story he goes into episode 2, David Mason, the piccolo player off of Penny Lane, very high trumpet solo, which was very nice. Well, piccolo solo, which really makes the song. David Mason was interviewed about this for the 1992 special about the 25th anniversary of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. That's also included in the Beatles box set, the archive box set, which I will also review at a later date, at another time. So just very much a breakdown of that, which is very nice. We also get a breakdown of Band on the Run, and there's very few songs from Paul's solo career in the documentary, and that's kind of the nitpicking thing I have as a hardcore fan. you only get some stuff from 1973 and a couple tracks from 1980, but there's so many different albums. And I think this really begs for a part two. Similar format, but you could really go into the solo years with this, with Rick and Paul talking, going through the console, going through the tapes. I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention that one of the consultants on this project is Mark Lewison, Beatles author and historian. So definitely a lot of good background information. Paul's memory can be a little bit faulty at some points, but it's great to have these stories. I mean, he's 79. I started my channel on July 1st of this year, so kind of a belated happy birthday for him from back on June 18th. It's just great to have him to be able to tell these stories. They're just an amazing thing. Just great to see him talking in this manner and kind of deconstructing the tracks, which again is really the strong point of the documentary. He goes into also the next track, which is Waterfalls from McCartney 2, released in 1980. He'll say that Deep fans kind of let him know about the track. Well, yeah, I'm one of the Deep fans. I mean, there's a lot of songs I'd love to ask him about, have him play live if he is going to do live concerts again. So that would be kind of nice. He does work on a new song in this episode, something called Life Can Be Hard. It sounds like a little snippet, but it's very well done. I hope he finishes it. And it kind of leads me to another point that I hope that Paul and Rick will actually work on an album together. I think Rick would be a very good producer for Paul's next album. That's just me personally. I think it'd be a natural fit. We don't know what the future holds, so that's just a little thought that's out there. Episode 3, they go through a few more songs again, kind of back in the USSR is kind of done as the intro. Paul was asked, how did you know it was different? The fame level that he had, how did he know it was different? And he kind of goes into that a little bit. He does say a familiar story that they couldn't go to the U.S. unless they had a #1 song. This was being said to Brian Epstein, their manager at the time. Paul says to Brian, well, no, we can't go to the U.S. unless we have a #1 hit. I'm a little bit skeptical about that because, again, if they only had a #5 hit, are you not going to go on American TV and introduce yourselves? Or, a #3 hit? I don't know. I mean, maybe that's what he felt, but I'm sure if the money was good enough and everything else for the Ed Sullivan Show, meaning their 1964 February appearance, I'm sure they would have gone. That's just me. That's just my own personal opinion. He kind of goes into some influences in episode 3. Little Richard, kind of a really big influence on the Beatles sound. They go into a breakdown of Babies in Black, kind of a song breakdown. And again, they kind of jump around the timeline, which is a lot of fun. Babies in Black, kind of a really nice deep track. I think that was off of Beatles for Sale in 1964. I'd have to double check that myself. But I'm pretty sure that's the album that it's off of. Kind of just says that they started writing for themselves. There's some great 1966 live footage in there, so which sounds great. I think a lot of the footage was taken from the 1966 Germany concerts, is what it seems like. So I think that would be a good release. Again, just me, but I think that would be fantastic. He goes into a little story about recording A-sides and B-sides, Phil Spector telling them, well, you could always just issue a B-side of the same song and just have it sing along. Paul kind of says, no, that'd be kind of cheating people if it was the same song with the vocals removed, which I agree. I mean, I think they made some really good B-sides during the Beatles' career. Quite honestly, could have been A-sides, just that good of a quality. Not all the time, but I think definitely some tracks out there that are some strong contenders. The next song, And I Love Her, kind of just goes into George Harrison's intro, kind of a nice breakdown of that. That's just really constructed very well. George's guitar really adds to the track, so that's just a lot of fun. Mentioned songwriting, that other people would follow their example. That's one of the things mentioned in this episode. Roy Orbison, another big influence. Paul mentioned something interesting in episode 3, that he teaches a songwriting class at the Liverpool Institute of Performing Arts. That's his school that he's built. I think that was started around 1993 or 1994. I might be incorrect in my chronology on that. But he just mentions to have an ending to a song, which is very, very nice. Rick also asked Paul, well, what was something that you saw in concert that you'd never heard before? A good memory. Paul mentions the Kinks, which is very nice. It's very nice that they actually mentioned them in a documentary. I don't think they've ever mentioned them before. I know other times in the past they've mentioned, people like the Rolling Stones or people like Bob Dylan, who he does mention at the Albert Hall concert, the famous Albert Hall concert where Dylan goes electric. Or mentions Jimi Hendrix, seeing him as well. Another song breakdown, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, again, just going into bass and vocals, the drums kind of breaking down that track as well. They go into a little bit about India, breakdown of Dear Prudence. So those are just some of the things with episode 3. I don't want to go on too long with that. Episode 4, they do a nice breakdown of Maxwell's Silver Hammer. The intro that starts the episode is Nowhere Man, a nice 1966 live version of that, which again, probably from the German concerts during that tour. Maxwell's Silver Hammer, getting back to that, they kind of made bass sounds with not a tuba. I thought it was a tuba for a long time. It was actually a bass guitar making a tuba sound, so it was kind of interesting. He also states that Robert Moog, I might be pronouncing that incorrectly, of the Moog synthesizer, he was the inventor of the Moog synthesizer, was there in the studio. There's kind of a nice little clip of Robert Moog showing the Moog synthesizer in an instructional video. And again, Maxwell's Silver Hammer is off of Abbey Road, so this is 1969, big, huge console, not like what we have today, where on our devices we could make 20,000 sound effects, I'm sure. So again, there's a couple more song breakdowns. Hard Day's Night is in episode 4 as well. He does mention a little bit about George Martin. A little bit of George Martin's past is that George Martin had served in the Royal Air Force, but he was always a producer, so that was always his role. And George Martin was the Beatles producer, so integral to everything. He would have the title of fifth Beatle, in my opinion. He is very integral to the Beatles' sound, their style, everything. Let's see, there's also a nice little mention about the end of Sgt. Pepper. It's a little dog whistle sound that only dogs can hear. And Rick kind of comments, well, maybe we need a dog test to hear that. That was in relation to some of the sounds that George Martin could kind of play for the Beatles. Like, can you hear this frequency? Can you hear that frequency? And then goes up from there. Episode 4, they go into a little bit about Tomorrow Never Knows, some of the tape loops and everything like that. They do mention the alternate anthology version. Take 3, I think it was. Now, that was in the Beatles anthology from 1995. So again, there's a little bit of parallels between the Beatles anthology and this documentary. Some of the same tapes are used, but again, obviously it's 25 plus years later, so you're kind of getting Paul's perspective now, as opposed to Paul, George, Ringo, and George Martin going over the track during the Beatles anthology when that was released back in 1995. So just a little similarity and difference there as well. Kind of goes into meeting Ringo with the episode. There's another nice breakdown of one of the songs, Another Girl, for I've Got Another Girl, from Help. So that's kind of just a nice little breakdown of drums. So again, a lot of breakdown of drums, guitar, bass. Just hearing these tracks in this way, it's kind of like a nice little remix. It allows to just hear some of the isolated elements, which is, again, just very nice, very well done. Let's see here. He mentions other music at Abbey Road, that Pink Floyd was recording Dark Side of the Moon around the same time as Early Wings. They go into a breakdown of Live and Let Die, which is very nice, kind of hearing that on the console. Paul does a little breakdown on the piano in the episode as well, which was kind of nice to see as well for that. Isolated piano track on that. And then to cap off episode 4, Check My Machine. Now that's off of McCartney 2, kind of a nice little deep track. It really does groove along, it is a nice track. It's about a 10.5-minute track, I think. One of the comments is it's kind of like jazz, meaning that the phrase is repeated over and over again, but just in different ways. So that's just kind of nice to go with that. We go up to episode 5, Lovely Rita is mentioned. That's a nice song breakdown. I Lost My Little Girl is mentioned in episode 5. Now that I Lost My Little Girl is one of Paul's first songs that he wrote. Probably the very first song, I'm almost positive on that. So he mentions that. He talks about that song a little bit, playing acoustic guitar, very nicely shot. Um, the only other time I can remember him really mentioning the song was the Unplugged special back in 1991. That I'll also get to in a future review, but it was just nice to, to sort of bring up that song again. So, next song they go into, This Boy. Very nice kind of early Beatles track. Again, I want to say from 1964. Again, that might be from Beatles for Sale. I want to say that's where that track is from. Very much kind of like a cabaret song. They mention very much kind of a ballad song. One of the things that Brian Epstein mentioned to the group kind of early on is they couldn't go in their leather stage gear all the time. Now in Hamburg they would wear the leather jackets, leather pants, all that. It looked very rock and roll. Well, to present them to a wider audience, Brian Epstein mentioned, okay, let's get you guys into more suits and a little bit more suitable. You can't do just a rock show all the time. You have to include some ballads in there. So that's kind of where the cabaret comment comes from, which it was pretty accurate. It's a nicely constructed song, some good harmonies. One of the next songs I go into is Come Together. Come Together, just one of my favorite tracks off of Abbey Road. It is very similar to a song by Chuck Berry called You Can't Catch Me. Now, they mentioned that but in the documentary, but kind of what they don't mention, not sure why they didn't touch on that, is the song You Can't Catch Me. So Chuck Berry and John Lennon were doing a recording for one of the variety shows back around 1972. I want to say it was either the Mike Douglas show or Dick Cavett. I want to say it was Mike Douglas. So the reason I'm bringing this up is they're kind of jamming together. Well, at some point later, Chuck Berry realizes, hey, Come Together sounds an awful lot like You Can't Catch Me. So instead of going to court, what Chuck Berry did was, okay, mentions to John, well, I won't sue you over one of the lines in the song, but you have to record either 2 or 3 of my songs for the upcoming rock and roll album. Well, John did that. He did that on his rock and roll covers album that was released in 1975. So he does You Can't Catch Me. That kind of avoids a whole big lawsuit over the songwriting of Come Together. That's an interesting little side story that you really won't hear in the documentary, but that's just kind of a nice little something I wanted to throw in there to compare and contrast. Episode 5, near the end of it, they break down Maybe I'm Amazed. There is some sort of guitar in this mix that they have that's not in the released mix that we all know about. The guitar almost makes like an SOS type of sound. I'm glad he mixed it out. I don't know how it ended up in there, but there's just some parts of the track where he must have, Paul McCartney must have just mixed it out of the final take that appears on McCartney. So, I think that's kind of nice. And there's a very nice John Lennon quote from 1980 that gets mentioned as well to Paul. Rick kind of reads the quote to Paul saying something along the lines of that Paul McCartney is a very innovative bass player and a lot of his stuff was kind of underrated. I'm paraphrasing here, but I want to say that was from the September 1980 Playboy interview. There's a little bit more to the quote, but it was very complimentary, and Paul seems genuinely surprised and taken back at that. Kind of happy that John mentioned it to somebody, even if it wasn't to Paul himself. So episode 6, we go into the final episode. We get the breakdown of yesterday. Paul goes into the familiar story of, okay, I dreamed about the song. This we've kind of heard a million times before. It's you've heard it. If you're even a casual fan, you've probably heard that mentioned as one of the stories. So again, that's it's nice to hear again, but we've heard it before. I mean. Could be worse. I guess Paul could have mentioned the old Hey Jude story with, the movement you need is on your shoulder. That does not get mentioned in the documentary, so I'm kind of glad some of the stories he kind of let it be, pun intended. Anyways, so kind of going on, just goes into some other early influences. James Ray, who was kind of an early influence of the Beatles as well, he performed a little song called Got My Mind Set on You, which was written by Rudy Clark. Well, that title might sound familiar, and there'll be a little bit of a clue coming up at the end of this episode, since we're almost finished with this. So stay tuned for that. But we also get a breakdown of And Your Bird Can Sing from the Revolver album, 1966. Again, a nice breakdown of the song. One of the final parts of the episode is kind of going into just a little bit more about songwriting. Again, he goes into one of his favorite tunes is Here, There, and Everywhere. Paul really enjoys it. And also, again, just some nice breakdowns of that. Now, that kind of ends my notes as I've been sort of looking through. And thank you for bearing with me. It's a little bit harder when there's no physical product to review, when it's just kind of notes and a lot of notes and a lot of parts to 6 different episodes. So the final thing in episode 6 is they do something, a little breakdown of A Day in the Life. Very nice to hear. I mean, I think it's probably one of their best moments, one of their best songs, and one of the best true John and Paul compositions, as in just both very much melded together. Very nice to see, very nice to see some of the video again. End of the episode, they end with, on the end credits, the Abbey Road medley, and in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make. So again, just very enjoyable. I like the documentary. I'd say it's pretty good. You know, I think even almost essential in some ways. But again, just some caveats, just some caution. You know, I want to hear stuff from the solo years. I'd love to hear some more Wing stuff. I'd love to see something done in this style further. Now, at the time of this taping, I don't know if we're going to get a physical release. That's unknown. Is there more that was left off the cutting room floor? I don't know about that. Most likely, I would say there's probably a lot more that was left on the cutting room floor than what was broadcast over Hulu. But again, just a very nice series. It's very nice to have Paul to tell these stories, so I think those are some of the strong suits of the documentary. Overall, very enjoyable. I think, go ahead and watch it. You know, even if you've heard the stories a million times before, it's well worth watching still. It's nice to see it in this format. So I appreciate everybody bearing with me, bearing with my notes, and, you know, a bit more talking and a bit more going off of different topics. But again, much like the documentary, it didn't go in chronological order either. So next week, if you'll join me for my next episode, that should be again on the regular times on Fridays, barring anything else. That's the plan, at least. I'm going to go ahead and delve into George's album from 1987, Cloud 9, which, as you guessed it, has that song, Got My Mind Set on You. So what I wanted to do is just say again, thank you so much. Again, if you like this video, please give a thumbs up, subscribe, hit that bell. I'll have the next video, and until then, we'll go ahead and see you later.